Rebecca, everybody is bothered now with this prolongation of the implementation of the agreement, with this delay. What do you think? What should it mean? Why this compromise was taken? And do you think it would hinder the process of the implementation and the whole reform and the Ukraine coming closer to the European Union?
As far as I can judge the situation, the political situation before the yesterday agreement, I think those who negotiated saw no alternative to go this way. But to be clear, my idea and my reading of this is not that association is given up or watered down. I think if the details given by the officials who have been participating in the negotiations, if the details are right, it could help to improve the internal situation and the economic development of Ukraine. It could.
What do you think Ukraine, I mean, I know that you haven't been there yet. What Ukraine, if it's ready for concession, as it is, so what Ukraine gets as for this concession?
So from the European side, until 2016, January 2016, Ukraine will have in several sectors of trade will have advantages based on support and decisions now by the European Union. I know it feels very difficult to accept it because there is an open question, and this open question is on ongoing war in Ukraine in the east, and so I think the acceptance for the compromise is and must be connected for Ukrainians with the end of Russian aggression in the east.
What actually European Parliament can do in this situation, because still the ceasefire is not always clear. The people with the guns, they're still there. Crimea is invaded. So what still can be done?
So I like to be honest. It's clear that Europeans decided not to help a military solution. They decided that they don't want a military solution. This was, I think, different in Russia. Russia wanted a military solution, and so they still are supporting the so-called separatists, the so-called rebels. I call them also terrorists, and so they are in part Russian soldiers, and they are still supporting this, and this is really the open question. So beyond the compromise of yesterday in Brussels, what's going to happen with the fighting in the east of Ukraine? And from my perspective, it feels Ukraine respected the ceasefire, but the People's Republic of Donetsk and their Russian supporters did not respect it. Fighting continues.
And we have the European Parliament would vote for the new commissioners, and there is a new representative, high representative for the foreign relations. We had a lot of critics of Federica Mogherini being a bit soft on Russia, and now we're talking about the representative on the enlargement, who is from Austria, but who, I mean, he hasn't openly told anything supportive to Russia, but in a way, in this circle, there were a lot of people who are soft on Russia. How do you think what the Parliament, you don't represent the whole Parliament, but what Parliament can do, what is your position, what can be done, and what we can expect from this commission, for new commission?
So I think the Parliament has to take care that there is no denial on who was pushing for a military conflict, a war in eastern Ukraine. This was the Russian side. So Parliament has to be the force in Europe being honest on the situation, and I think we have been this institution in Europe always trying to be honest towards Ukraine and to stand with Ukrainians in this conflict by majority. On Mogherini and Mr. Hahn, we will see. I'm among the skepticals, but I have some hopes that Mr. Tusk, who's the president of the European Council now, can balance this, because he is a good and strong politician from Poland. We will see. The new Commission will not start to work before December, end November, December of this year. So still we have to work with Mr. Barroso. By the way, but so my idea right now, and I know this might sound weak for many Ukrainians, I cooperated with in very difficult times here in Kiev, but my idea right now is to accept that obviously a better compromise than yesterday has been achieved was not feasible, was not possible, and so my idea right now is to do everything we can do, not to allow a situation of frozen conflict in eastern Ukraine. So all measures we discussed before, the sealing of the border, the supervision, the robust supervision in the hands of OSCE, we have to take care. But in the same time, I'm also convinced that Putin's strategy via the war in Donbass is targeting the reform process in Ukraine. And it's now again in the hands of the EU and the Ukrainians together to win the battle on reforms, to win the battle against corruption, to be ready to help the Ukrainians to survive the winter, not only to survive, but to have acceptable conditions during the winter. So it's not that I want to escape that Ukrainians are right to say in a way we lost, with this compromise, but we lost together. So Europeans and Ukrainians lost together, and we have now the responsibility to win the reform battle.
When you talk reforms, it's becoming like the word, you need reforms. What kind of reforms you mean?
So I'm not talking about federalization of Ukraine. So I'm not a friend of this discussion. So to be able to go for reforms, I think you need empowerment of people working in civil services, and you need also better rules. And in this idea, decentralization, another share of power in between Kiev and the regions, might play a role, but it's a process. I'm very much behind the ideas of lustration. I'm very much behind the package against the law package against corruption, which has been prepared but not advanced. And so around lustration and fight against corruption, I see the most urgent steps in reform process in Ukraine.
But what is your view on the forthcoming parliament election, as the law on election has been changed?
So I know that again this is not the best situation considering the law, considering the urgency of the elections, and that there is not really a lot of time for newcomers to get ready for elections and to be able to compete with the old political forces, but so they take place, and I hope that Ukrainian citizens will see a change in the Verkhovna Rada. I hope that less interests of big business and oligarchs will be represented in the Rada, but more interests of average citizens, and more members of the Ukrainian parliament in the future will work on a better life for normal citizens.
Do you see the signs of that?
Yeah, I see that even some of the very strong activists, very good people from the Euromaidan I met last winter on Maidan, that they are getting ready to go to parliament. I will back all those new forces, and if there is the need for advice how to get organized in a difficult environment. So I come from a small party. My party had always to fight against establishments to be successful. Maybe advice is needed for those newcomers.
But how do you think that they would, there are people who think that the system would eat them, that they would be used by the system at the faces of Maidan. So what is this advice in this situation? This is a threat for them, and everybody talks about that. That instead being outsiders, they would become insiders and would be just used as the faces by the big powers.
So there is no perfect recipe against it. I made my own experiences, and I think what I could recommend is be honest towards your electorate. Never go for believing your own propaganda. Yeah? Be honest. Say if you achieve a compromise, for example, if you comment on the compromises from yesterday in Brussels, it would be good also for Poroshenko, Yatsenyuk and others to be honest on what was feasible and what has been achieved. So be honest. Explain the difficulties of political environment. Don't make you more powerful than you in fact are, and listen to the people. Don't betray the people. Then the system has no chances or less chances to eat you.
And coming from Germany, how you really recently there was a lot of critique on the German policy towards Russia, on like accusing him being very slow, like imposing maybe the dialogue with this so-called organization DNR, LNR. What is your take on that? And is anything changing? What the Ukraine can expect from Germany as a state?
I think Germans indeed are right now a difficult country in public opinion. They supported Ukraine and Euromaidan movement during winter a lot. Only when Russia came into the game as a new power, the public opinion started to be less clear on Ukraine. And this in fact also happened to politicians in Germany. They are not really close to Ukrainian issues, and they are much closer, many of them, to the Russian situation. And I think so. In combination with history, German debate on deutsche Schuld, deutsche Verantwortung, German responsibility in Second World War, we have a difficult mixture right now.
How about the German responsibility? But how about the German responsibility then towards the Ukrainians who were fighting in the middle of them in the Second World War, having the main battlefield in this territory?
The problem is that Germans, most of Germans so far did not learn to distinguish in between Russia, Ukraine, the situation before the war, in the war, after early 90s. So Ukraine as a state and the history of this state is not really known among the Germans. They know much more about Russia. And also I have to admit that Russian propaganda was quite successful in Germany. We have to change it. So I'm not very proud on the role of my country in this.
How to change it?
Only by working with public debates. So I'm writing op-eds. I'm discussing in my party. I'm so also intervening in decision-making processes in the German Parliament. But mainly I try it by bringing Ukrainians and Germans closer together.
Like really tell, so if there is this Russian propaganda, how it works, especially like towards the people who support Ukraine?
I think for me it has been a very, very new experience during the last months and the development in Ukraine and my political work for, with and sometimes also criticizing Ukraine. It was a complete new experience that in Germany, in public debates, via mails, via internet, via letters, I have been attacked in a more and more aggressive way. The wording was for me sometimes unbelievable. So bitch is still a nice word, so I'm the bitch of all fascists in Ukraine. I'm the fascist as such in Germany in their wording. But what then happened 2 weeks ago, this was beyond all limits. I found on my house, on the letterbox at my house in the countryside, in a very small village with only 10 houses, I found a poster with very, very shocking photos. I knew them before, with killed people from eastern Ukraine, making me responsible as a fascist, Ukrainian German fascist for their death. And I think so in a way, many people are discussing whether the Cold War is back, but those who are pro-Russians, they go beyond all limits in their campaigning in Germany.
Thank you.
Good.